Milani, welcome. My name's Ian Campbell from Palliative Care Australia, on the lands of the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people in Canberra. Welcome to Thursdays at 3. We're back for 2024, sharing conversations with people living and working at the end of life. Thanks so much for being here. Thanks so much for tuning in. It's always a real privilege to share these stories with you, but especially so today. Rachel Callander is Evie's mum. Evie died with a rare condition on the 10th of October 2010. She was just 2.5 years old. But this little life has stirred a powerful force within her mum and, as a result, the wider community. Welcome, Rachel. How are you?
Thanks, Ian. I think that's one of the loveliest introductions I've ever had.
Okay. Yeah, it's well deserved.
Thank you. And I love how you honoured Evie to begin with like that. That's really powerful. And it's true. It feels like, yeah, she has stirred this amazing new life in me, and I can't wait to talk about it all with you.
We'll do a lot of remembering and honouring Evie today. Here we are, Rachel. I guess the end of the year, the start of a year of reflection. Let's look at 2023 for you first. How's the year been?
It's been a big one, actually, a challenging one, probably one of the hardest ones in a strange way, but also one, as I reflect back, one of the ones I'm most proud of. I feel like there's been a lot of transition and a lot of stress and a lot of change and uncertainty this year, but through it all, there's been some beautiful work, and actually a lot of that work and the grounding for my year has been working with Palliative Care Australia. And I'm not just saying that, I really do mean it. Like the work that I've been doing with Palliative Care Australia over the last almost 2 years has been some of the most meaningful and profound of my life. And it's been a huge support to me personally. But knowing that it's doing such good things in the world is beyond meaningful. Yeah.
Rachel, you've been one of the key voices in the development of the Paediatric Palliative Care National Action Plan, which was one of the highlights for PCA in 2023. We launched it with Assistant Minister Jed Carney at Very Special Kids in Melbourne, a significant achievement for PCA and indeed Australia over the last 3 years. And your voice has been instrumental in shaping the recommendations that are in that action plan. And during the course of our conversation, we'll tease some of that out with you today. But look, I'm really aware that you're so generous with your story and Evie's story, and I'm also aware of the toll it can take when you're always sharing your story and being so generous. So I'm really keen for you to only share what you're comfortable sharing with us today. But when did you first, I guess, suspect that Evie wasn't well? How did all this start for you?
Well, it was kind of right after she was born. She was born at 41 weeks, so she was kind of overterm, and she was a lot smaller than they were expecting, and she couldn't latch to feed, and she sort of choked and vomited as soon as we tried to feed her, and that kind of triggered a lot of testing and support and ICU interventions. And then within a few weeks, they'd done some genetic testing and discovered that she had this very rare chromosome condition. And it's amazing, actually, because I've shared in my past stories and storytelling that I never actually wanted children. Like, I was terrified of being a mum. Like, children and parenthood just freaked me out because I think I'm allergic to normal. It sort of terrifies me, the idea of normal and following rules and systems. And so this little being, this new soul in the world that was Evie, meant that we could kind of throw away all the rule books and we could live a life of complete freedom. And so in many ways, she was just the most perfect child for me, who just could respond to her on a day-to-day kind of basis. Thoughts of the future, any expectations were removed, and in their place we just had this appreciation of living every moment to its fullest. So it was an interesting time to kind of hold the tension of potentially losing Evie with this beautiful freedom and living in the moment. Like, I think with grief and when parents are given a really scary diagnosis, you've got to hold a lot of very conflicting emotions all at once, this powerful deep love and this sense of potential loss. And it's a huge space to have to hold.
How did you find the system? Was the system there to support you, given that you were perhaps an anxious mum going into this, as you say, that, you know, you were a bit unsure about kids and all of that? How did you find the system? Was it there to meet you? Did it rise to the challenge with you when you realised that Evie wasn't well?
Not really. It was individuals that rose and gave me a lot of insight into the parent that I could be and the parent that I wanted to be. But I also feel like Evie drew that out of me as well. And Evie was born in New Zealand, 13 years ago. And there was no such thing as a palliative care team or, pediatric palliative care team. That was non-existent. And to many respects, it's still that way now. So it was individuals that supported us the most. And the way they did that was actually through their language and communication. And I was aware of how well I was feeling and how I was feeling supported by how they communicated with me. Like in a new diagnosis space or in a rare disease space, especially there's so much confusion, there's so much uncertainty, there are so many unanswered questions. And I found that the way that healthcare professionals communicated with me made me feel either a sense of partnership with them or security and that they've got our back, or alienation and confusion. And in those circumstances, that added more pain and trauma that was necessary. I'm not really explaining it very well, I don't think, but basically I became very aware of communication and very aware of language.
Let's unpick that a little bit. Let's unpick, I guess, the good and the bad of that to help people understand your experience. I guess starting with the bad, what did bad communication look like for you and Evie in your circles?
I guess some of the words that were used around Evie. So for me, I saw Evie as this new, beautiful soul in the world, full of potential, and she was so adorable, and she was so cute, and she was so lovely, and to me, she was perfect, but the words that healthcare professionals would use around her were words like, she's mentally retarded, she's abnormal, she's defective, she's disabled, these very subtractive, negative, soul-destroying words, that language that has a negative energy around it. And I started to realize, if people have these words spoken over them enough in their life, they start to believe that that's who they are. And I realized, the words that I was using around Evie were words, like her potential and her abilities and the impact she was having on me and those around her, her character, her personality, all of the beautiful, unique things that she could do, I honored and celebrated. But in a rare disease space or a disability space, there's nowhere to measure those very unique things. And so you feel like your child is being dismissed a lot. And I remember feeling that, people would ask me all the time, what's wrong with your child? That's the first thing they'd ask me when they saw Evie or met Evie. What's wrong with her? What's wrong? And the only response I had at that time was, well, she's got partial trisomy 9 and partial monosomy 6, and she's got multiple ventricular septal defects, and she can't walk, and she can't do it, and blah, 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 and the person just kind of glazed over with all of this information. And it's scary. It's big words. No one knows what that means.
No.
And I felt like that was the language I'd been given to describe my child from the healthcare professional space, but that's not what I believed about her. And so as a parent, I had to become an extra advocate and I had to sort of change the conversations that I was having with people so that I could talk about the things that Evie could do and who she was as a person. And that took time over the years as I got to know Evie. But once I had this new language, it was like a language of superpowers, actually. You ask your question. Yeah.
Where do you think that poor communication came from? Was it fear? Was it poor training and education? Bit of everything?
I think so, but of everything. I feel like that I don't think the healthcare professionals, they don't mean to do a bad job. They don't go to work to say,
No.
I'm going to really hurt a parent today and do a really bad job at communicating. They don't do that. they thought that in giving me the information, they were doing their job, but they failed to understand the impact that those words has on a parent emotionally, and how much they're actually understanding. You know, medicine language is a whole language in itself. There's 50,000 plus unique words in the medicine language, and unless you speak it fluently, everything's very confusing. Most people speak regular person language. So the language has to be unpacked. And I've been doing a lot of work over the last 7 years to measure and understand the impact of certain kinds of language and what that does to the relationship between a parent, a patient, and a healthcare professional when this language is used. And this, I mean, I can talk to you for hours about this. This is kind of the basis of my work now, but it's kind of like there's different kinds of language, from the patronizing kind of fluffy, toxic positivity sort of language. Confusing language, which is basically all of medicine that we've just sort of discussed, to the dehumanizing language, which was what I got a lot of with Evie in the disability space. You know, those words like retarded, abnormal, defective, mutated, you know, disabled, all those things. And all of those three kinds of language, I think they do come from a space of fear. The patronizing language comes from a space of not wanting to say the wrong thing. So you land on cliches and fluffy kind of positive stuff. And a lot of parents get that. And I had that a lot, like as an example of that, you know, I was told a lot, you know, special kids are only given to special parents, or God only gives you what you can handle. I'm like, well, I don't know, maybe we need to have a conversation with God about some of this, because this is a lot, you know. And what it does, like, it comes from a kind, well-meaning space, but it doesn't land, and it sort of creates an extra level of isolation. Or a lot of families get told, oh, just stay strong. And I've heard from a lot of parents that say, you know, if someone tells me to stay strong one more time, I'm going to punch them in the face, you know. So it's that it doesn't land. And so we're not very good at connecting with big stuff, and especially with grief. And we're talking about palliative care, like, what do you say? You know, it's so hard. And people don't want to say the wrong thing, so, you know, they land on these cliches.
We're going to come back to that question, Rachel. I'm keen for your advice around that, but I want to take you back to something you said earlier when you talked about having to change the conversation, and putting myself in your shoes and at that time and trying to change the conversation. Here you are, a new mum, you've got a sick child, you're getting all these big words from big people with big qualifications who have big positions. How on earth do you go about challenging that and changing the conversation given that circumstance you're in?
Yeah, that's a beautiful question, and it was really hard. But Evie led me and guided me mostly. And I did have some beautiful examples of amazing communication from healthcare professionals early on. And so I'll share that with you first. So the first time I experienced I call it empowering communication, which is clear, kind, and curious at its heart, I guess. You know, it's communication that wants to land well with somebody else. And especially in the transaction between a healthcare professional and a parent, knowledge needs to be transferred in a way that's understood, so that the parent or the patient can do something with it meaningfully. And so the first time I experienced this kind of communication was with a clinical geneticist. So it turns out that I'm a carrier for the condition that Evie has, and I had no idea before this. And so there was a lot of big news from big people, as you say. And when that's happening, you can often feel very small. But this beautiful man, he had a big, warm smile. I just remember he was just such a warm person. And that's a big, big plus. Warmth is powerful to build trust and rapport. But the first thing he said to me when I sat down in his office, it wasn't a big list of big scary words or anything about Evie's condition. The first thing he said, what do you know about chromosomes? So he opened the whole conversation with a question. And this is a lot of the work that I do now. It's like the power of asking really powerful questions as a way to align where somebody might be at. And it was brilliant, because I clearly could say, I actually have no idea. I couldn't even draw you a chromosome. And so that's where we started.
Yeah.
And then he drew a chromosome, and then I understood within 20 seconds what was going on in my body and Evie's body. And I felt really honored that he would share such brilliant information with me, because I left his office knowing more than I did when I left. And that's not often the case. Often you leave a healthcare professional's room more confused than you started. So to leave with clarity and a feeling of warmth and support was like a moment that I'll never forget. And I was like, this can be done well. Like, communication doesn't have to be hard. Like, we just need to do it better. And I think, to your other question, you know, I think healthcare professionals don't have enough training in communication, especially when they're delivering really challenging news or difficult or unexpected diagnoses. But sorry.
Continue.
But I guess for me, and changing that conversation, and where it started for me, it was when Evie was around 2 years old. I noticed that she experienced the world differently to other people. Like, I could sense that she was experiencing things that other people didn't notice or sensed. So every time we drove on a piece of road in New Zealand, we went under a lot of electrical pylons on this piece of road, and she would always cry when we came up to the pylons, drove under them, and then kind of passed underneath, and then she'd stop crying. And it happened so often, and then it started happening in supermarkets or anytime we went through electric sliding doors. And I thought, well, the only explanation I can have for this was that she had an electromagnetic sensitivity, you know, that was completely unique to her, that she could feel electromagnetic fields. And so I was like, she's like a baby Magneto, you know, of X-Men or something. And so I started saying that she had superpowers as a lighthearted way to describe that phenomenon of Evie. But then once I started thinking about this, it was kind of exciting for me and sort of a throwaway, lighthearted comment. But I started thinking about Evie and what she was teaching me and everyone around her, everything about her and her uniqueness, and all of the beautiful things that she did became a collection of superpowers, essentially. Like, she had the most wicked giggle, and she loved being on a beanbag, and even though she couldn't say a single word and she could just use one little sound in the tone of her voice, I knew what she needed, and we could make up games together, and we never spoke a single word together, but I had the distinct sense that she knew how deeply she was loved, and I knew how she felt safe with me, and we loved being in each other's company, and there was so much freedom, and we just had the best time together. Like, she was just the most beautiful little child. And so all of these things became her superpowers, and all of these things I could never articulate when, you know, a stranger would ask me, what's wrong with your child? You know, I didn't get to share any of those beautiful things when that was their question. But once I had this, I guess, this collection of superpowers and a new way of describing Evie that wasn't reliant on those subtractive deficit medicine words, I could change the conversation. And so the next time someone said, what's wrong with your child? I just said, well, nothing, actually. She's got superpowers, you know, and they kind of looked at me strangely and they said, well, what do you mean? And then I got to reframe that whole conversation to talk about Evie, her essence, her character, her personality. And then after I'd sort of shared some of these beautiful things with them, they looked at her and said, oh, isn't she beautiful? Look at her delicate little fingers and her deep, sparkly eyes. What a little poppet she is. And I was like, yeah, she's amazing, you know. And in that conversation, it's like we built a bridge over fear, and we built a bridge over difference, and we called it acceptance and inclusion and love. And then that stranger walked away knowing more about Evie without fearing difference. And I got to share what I deeply really loved about Evie, like other parents did, you know. Because as parents, we love talking about children. We love sharing the amazing things that they do and who they are. You know, that's a unique joy of parenthood, and I still feel that same sense now, you know, 13 years after she's gone. Like, I love talking about her because I feel like this is a very unique I guess experience of parenthood now that she's gone, that I still get to share her legacy with people.
What's going on for your family and friends at this time, Rachel? What are they learning? How are they participating in Evie's journey?
Well, I feel like they just support me, and I mean, my life looks very different now from when Evie died. You know, when Evie died, I was a wedding and portrait photographer living in New Zealand in a little town called Timaru. And now I live in Perth, Western Australia. I have a beautiful new husband, and I've been here for 7 years, and now I'm a healthcare communication consultant. And so, you know, it's a very significant pivot, like, I guess, in my life. And I attribute that all to Evie. And I think it's just, I feel very led. You know, everything I've learned from her and the powerful lessons about communication, it feels really empowering to have moved through the very raw, hard grief space to a point where I feel strong to hold it for others. So the work that I've been able to do with Palliative Care Australia and Paediatric Palliative Care Australia has felt so profound and so meaningful, because I can look back reflectively and know that I'm not in that hard place anymore. And I hope that that's encouraging for other families who are going through the very hard, raw, painful beyond words space of grief, that it just one day at a time, moving through it, and you can get through it. It never leaves, but it does change, like the shape of grief changes, and it doesn't hurt as much. Yeah.
There's great strength in what you talk about there, and the life that you now lead. Has that always been the case for you? Have you always had that strength of mind, that strength of purpose?
I don't know. Maybe. I don't know. I honestly don't know, Ian, but I feel like I really connect to meaning. And I remember as a young girl, as, you know, a teenager, I loved the poetry of Khalil Gibran. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, but he wrote a book called The Prophet. And I just remember loving this book as a teenage kid, because he'd sort of put words to my feelings in a way that was just so beautiful. I couldn't handle it. I was like, how do you write so powerfully about this? And he talks about joy and suffering, and being able to, you know, holding both of these things at the same time. And I really resonated with that. I'd lost my granddad when I was 14, and that was the first experience of death that I had in my life, and he was very, very precious to me. So this was a huge moment in my life as a young person. And I remember that those poems and that language and that love and that very artistic kind of way of communicating big stuff was a healing force for me. And so I think maybe that, and then my art practice. I've always loved art, making things, photographing little things, you know, finding treasures in the world. It kind of all connects to the idea of there's beauty in brokenness. I guess that's kind of an overarching theme in my life.
Are they the things that you turn to, that beauty, that creativity, when grief does get you down? Things can't be good all the time and strong all the time. You have bad days, surely.
Absolutely. Terrible days. And I can be just the worst human ever. Just terrible. I can get angry, and I need a lot of naps, and I cry, and, you know, all of the emotions. But I find joy is one of the single most beautiful vehicles for healing. And I think in grief, it's really hard to find joy. And sometimes as parents, they feel guilty for feeling joy. You know, they've lost their child, and if they suddenly feel happy for something, or they find themselves laughing, they're like, oh no, does that mean now that I don't care about my child because I'm happy? And it's not the case. That we're so capable of holding all of those things together, and we need to. And joy is the spark, the thing that needs to, we need to wrap it around ourselves, because it's the thing that can help us navigate grief. It doesn't take away the love that we had for our child, but it helps us to live truly, deeply with all of the emotions, with all of that experience.
And one of the things I've learned from parents who've lost children is, I guess, this desire to really highlight the value of their child's life,
Yeah.
and to highlight the power of that little life. These little people weren't here for long, but they had a tremendous presence and importance in the world. And if people, I guess, aren't able to live and live through their grief, then that purpose isn't able to be highlighted. The value of this life that has been lost isn't able to be shared.
Yeah, that can be true, I think, absolutely. And so I feel a deep sense of honour when people are still interested in Evie. And it's not an expectation that I have of my family and friends, but whenever they do remember her, or there's something that they're reminded of and they talk to me about it, that is so powerful. Like, I think when parents are grieving, the thing that's hardest, I've heard from many of them, is that they don't want their child to be forgotten. They need their child's name to be spoken. And I think that's really powerful and important. And to your point, then that legacy, that spirit that has been here, that has had such an impact and left a mark, a true mark on the world, is remembered and honoured.
Mm-hmm. Keen to take you down a rabbit hole just briefly.
Okay.
Your art, some beautiful art featured on your website, and looking at it, it reminds me of almost a satellite photo taken from space, looking down on Earth on a coastal estuary or something like that. How do you go about your art? Can you give us a sense of how you create your beautiful works?
I can, and I love that you saw the coastal galaxy kind of satellite vibe, because that's kind of the idea, I guess. And my art practice is incredibly random and spontaneous, and I kind of call it, following the sparks. Like, when I know what I love, and this is the power of joy as well. I think when you can follow joy, it's almost like joy has an energy, and the things that you love are nudging us towards joy. And so this kind of art practice came about during lockdown. I was drinking a gin and tonic in my backyard one day, feeling very sorry for the world. And I was drinking this glass, and I had an ice ball in my gin and tonic because I was being fancy. And I just remember seeing the sunshine on my ice ball and thought, oh my gosh, that is so pretty. I love this little sparkle of an ice ball. I'm going to photograph it. That's weird. That's a weird thing to think. And often this is the thing that happens with our little joy sparks. We go, oh, I love that. And then the next voice is, that's weird. And we squash it before it has a chance to kind of lead us to the next space, or, lead us on an adventure. And so I remember thinking, that's weird. And then I thought, who cares? Who cares? I'm going to go and photograph this anyway. And so I photographed my ice ball and thought that was really fun. And then I kind of got a bit bored, and then I thought, oh no, I've lost the spark. Where has it gone? And then I thought, no, wait, what if it was colourful? And so I decided to paint my ice ball. So you can kind of get a sense of my little joy spark just leading me along a little pathway of adventure. Fast forward, I kept trying new things. Anyway, ended up freezing water in a baking tray, and then painting that, and then photographing that as it melted and it turns into this glorious landscape.
Wow.
I know, it's so much fun. It's so much fun now that I actually teach people how to do it. I have workshops at my house. It's very fun.
Thank you for sharing that with us, and please head to Rachel Callander's website to check out the beautiful artwork we're talking about. Rachel, a few quick questions to finish up with. Our conversation, our time has gone so quickly, but I'm going to take you back to, I guess, that patronising language that you spoke about, that I guess is perhaps a bit of a default for people, that we flick this switch because we want to say the right thing, but we don't quite know what to say, and in the end, it comes out patronising, cliched, meaningless. How do we avoid that? What do we say, Rachel?
You know what? Sometimes less words is better. And even calling out the fear, like when we can be courageous and honest, and you can say to a person, I have no idea what to say right now. This is just the worst. And I'm here for you. That's pretty much it. You don't need something poetic or fancy, or, you know, you don't need much. Less is more. A hug, and even just acknowledging, I don't know what to say, because there actually isn't anything to say. Nothing you can say will make it better. But speaking a child's name, remembering birthdays, you know, remembering anniversaries, all those little things, checking in, that's the powerful piece. So the patronizing language, it doesn't need to exist really. But it's hard. Yeah.
What's ahead for you in 2024, Rachel? We've touched on your art workshops, the workshops you run for health professionals and improving their communication. What's ahead for you in 2024?
Well, I'm doing some beautiful work with an organisation in America, and it's the Muscular Dystrophy Duchenne Peak Body Organisation. And so I'm running fortnightly sessions with parents who've got children with muscular dystrophy Duchenne, and it's about supporting them and holding space for them and how to help them feel empowered so they can advocate for their sons. So we do a lot of work around self-care. We do a lot of work around language. We dive into some of the hurtful things that have been said. We talk about knowing what we need, so we can ask the people around us what we need, because I think a lot of parents, especially, you're so overwhelmed, you're so confused, there's so much that you need, and someone says, what do you need? You're like, I don't know, nothing really. But you actually need so much, but you don't know how to communicate what you need. So being able to know what you need and know who to ask that of is a really powerful thing as well. So yeah, it's a really beautiful community building belonging and capacity and that community, but also helping the healthcare professionals, supporting them. So it's kind of a bit of more the same, but in different ways, essentially. That's what my 2024 looks like so far. Yeah.
Rachel, thanks so much for sharing Evie with us this afternoon, sharing your time with us, and sharing your joy sparks with us. Thank you.
Yeah, they're very important. So I think that's the most important thing, is follow the joy sparks. They are a healing vehicle there to support us in our well-being. And it doesn't mean that we are forgetting our children or diminishing the experience of loss. It just means that this is something that we need to continue. Yeah.
I think it's time for a G&T, hey?
I think so, always. No, not always. Drink responsibly, but, you know, every now.
Thanks again, Rachel. Really appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you, Ian.
You'll find links to Rachel's website in the show notes, along with links to the Paediatric Palliative Care National Action Plan, which Rachel helped shape. Thank you so much for tuning in to Thursdays at 3, whether that's via PCA socials or Spotify, and engaging in matters of life and death. You'll find advice, tools and support at the Palliative Care Australia website, where you can also make a donation to support our work. Thanks for tuning in. See you next week.